everyone. So for our parents that are watching with their kiddos or any of my virtual kiddos, I am Miss P. I'm Mrs. Nugent's student teacher. Um, I am going to go over today, we're going to go over part one of the Southern Colonies. Today is Thursday, February 25th, 2021. We're going to go over the Southern Colonies, and we're going to do a few of the show-ins. So today we're going to go over terms that you need to know. So the first one is Bacon's Rebellion. Please notice the piece of bacon I have on here. So it was led by Nathaniel Bacon in the Virginia colony from 1675 to 1676. And the Virginian colonists that were led by Bacon were angry because they couldn't vote unless they owned land. And the rich settlers grew cash crops, which were good at the time. Remember, we talked about cash crops. They were what you grew for money. They didn't use them as much as they just grew them to sell, to make money. And times were hard for the poorer settlers and the farmers in the Virginia settlement. And they couldn't afford to build those big plantations. And the Native American tribes near them were attacking a lot to try and protect their land, their ancestral lands. So they were having a lot of problems. And Bexley, the governor at the time, was not willing to help them as much as Nathaniel Bacon would have liked, and the people who were with him would have liked. So they formed a militia, and a militia is a group of people with weapons who have other jobs during the day, but they're willing to fight for a specific cause. So the militia beat opposing native forces in two different battles. The militia enlisted the help of the Oakanichi people, but they were killed in massive numbers by other native tribes. After the rebellion, some of his followers were elected to the House of Burgesses, which was one of the things he did want. He wanted change in the government because he disagreed with Bexley and how Bexley ran the government, so he wanted a change. So this was a good outcome for him on the rebellion. All right, so what he did was to declare, Berkeley declared Bacon a rebel and a traitor because Nathaniel Bacon had originally asked Berkeley for assistance, and he was like, no, that costs money. Like, I'm not going to do that. And he was afraid that Native Americans that were friendly with them would get caught in the crossfire. So Nathaniel Bacon was declared a traitor. And new elections were called at the House of Burgesses for the first time in 14 years, which is when some of Bacon's supporters were elected into the office. So some of the people who were following Bacon were able to then make changes in laws and make decisions. And Bacon was pardoned, which just means that he was forgiven for what he had done, which was considered against Berkeley. Berkeley was the governor, and no longer punished. So what he wanted, he didn't like how the colonies were being governed. So what did he want? He wanted authorized raids on Native American tribes that were hostile, meaning that they would sometimes attack the colonists and were considered violent. So the raids were where they would go to them and attack them first. And he wanted to be the leader of these raids. Berkeley said no because he was afraid, like I said, that Native Americans who were their allies would get killed too. And Bacon also wanted to change the government of Virginia, which he did that. Some of his followers were elected into that House of Burgesses, that Virginia assembly. So next we're going to talk about indentured servants. So indentured servitude is different than slavery. It is a signed contract with a sponsor. A sponsor is a person who pays for the voyage of several people to the new colonies. So voyage is just passage. Like, I own lots of land, and I will pay for Mrs. Nugent to come to my new land, but she has to work for me for 5 to 7 years, typically. And after their work, if they lived, a lot of people, the work was very difficult, and the living conditions and the food were not very good. So a lot of them did pass away before their time was up. But if they lived, they were free to live in the colonies how they wanted. Some of them did become rich and lived great lives. The servants came from Europe, and they were almost always very poor, from very poor families in Europe. They were typically young, 15 to 25. And the system was put in place because the New World had so much land. Think about how much land there is in all of those colonies. And there were so few people here to work that land. So this was a way for them to get more people. This is before slavery. So servants were given clothes. Passage to the new colony, passage, voyage is just a trip to the new colonies. And after their time as a servant, some received at least 25 acres of land, a year's worth of corn, arms, which are guns, a cow, and new clothes. Some of them received absolutely nothing, but some of them received this. It was just the luck of the draw, whoever you made a deal with. So part two, they were, like I said, they were usually 15 to 25, but 50 to 60% died before they became free. So, y'all, that's half. Half of them, and over half, died while they were serving in this indentured servitude for that typically 5 to 7 years. They died from disease, punishment from the people that paid for them to come over here, their sponsors, and extreme work conditions. So life was not good as an indentured servant. All right, so next we're going to talk about a head rate. So a head rate is 50 acres of land given to new settlers that paid their own way to the colonies. But head rate was also given to anyone who paid someone else's voyage. So if I pay for 10 people's voyages, I get a lot more land than if those people would individually, if they each paid for their own. That's how people got big, big farms and plantations and could have all the land they would ever need. So settlers that were already there received 2 parcels of 50 acres, so 100 acres. For every passage to the colonies, that an existing settler brought, they received 50 more acres. So next we're going to talk about plantations. Plantations are huge. They're very, 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 very large. They're basically just a very large farm. They almost always grew crops instead of raising livestock. So livestock would be like cattle, horses, sheep, goats. But they typically grew cash crops. Remember, our cash crops are things that they would send typically to Europe. Tobacco, cotton, indigo. We're going to talk about indigo in a bit. So if you're like, what is indigo? No worries. We're going to talk about it. Lots of people lived and worked on this land. Indentured servants and then later slaves. So the need for indentured servants was because there was so much land and not enough people in the colonies to work it. And that's how plantations got started. So indigo is this really beautiful plant used to make blue-purple dye. Remember that blue-purple? It grows really well in higher ground in places like South Carolina. And it's a part of the bean family. So down here in the left-hand corner, you can see it grow but you can see it growing, sorry. And then up here in the right-hand corner is the different shades of indigo. It can be any of those. And it typically was grown in South Carolina. Okay, next we're going to talk about a proprietor. A proprietor is a person given control over a specific amount of land by the king. So the king of England, the king of Britain, gave this land. He was like, hey, I'm the king. I'm going to give this land to you. And then they were given that colony to rule as their own. So proprietary colonies were run by a colonial charter agreement. And a charter, remember, is written between the king and the colonists, allowing the colonists to govern and live on certain land in the New World. So if you were the proprietor of North Carolina, you couldn't just say, I feel like owning Virginia today too. No, it was a specific agreement. And then we have the king of Britain down here on the left at the time, not today. There's a queen now. All right, so now we're going to talk about the Maryland Toleration Act of 1649. It was also known as an act concerning religion. It ensured the freedom of religion for the Christian faith only. It did not give freedom of religion for any other belief system, just the Christian faith. So that was Protestants, Catholics, Puritans, Pilgrims, just people who were of the Christian faith. And it made it a crime to take away the rights of Christians because of their religion. even if you didn't agree with it, you couldn't take away their rights. Hate speech was no longer allowed. You couldn't yell at people and scream at them on the streets because you disagreed with their religion. Hate speech is just threatening or otherwise abusive speech to a group of people based on their differences. And this law actually set the stage for religious freedom in the U.S. And set the stage just means it made it easier for it to happen. So this was in Maryland. I have all of these arrows over here. All right, and then next we're going to go to our show it. We will talk tomorrow about important people. One second. So you're going to go to week 8, Thursday, Southern Colonies, part 1, show it. So that's week 8, Thursday, Southern Colonies, part 1, show it. All right. So we're going to identify the Southern Colonies. Now, if you look back here on the very first slide, the Southern Colonies are in orange. So they are Maryland, South Carolina, Virginia, Georgia, and North Carolina. All right? We are also going to go over the goals of Bacon's rebellion, because that was a lot. So he wanted Berkeley, the governor, to authorize raids on native tribes which were hostile. He wanted to be the leader of the raids on hostile Native American tribes. He wanted to change how Virginia was governed. He did not want a new colony for him. That was not what he wanted. And we're also going to talk about what a proprietor was. They were given control over a specific amount of land by the king. A specific amount of land by the king. All right, so I would like you guys to finish it by yourselves, because I know you are wholly capable. You are so smart. And if you're unsure, please go back into the PowerPoint and look at it, or rewatch the video. All right. Have a wonderful Thursday. I will see you guys tomorrow.